great to be here. I'm Daniel Roth. I'm a program manager on the ASP.NET team, and I'm super excited for .NET 6 to be finally shipped. It is loaded with great new features and improvements for Blazor app development. In this session, we're going to look at a bunch of them. We're going to look at enterprise-grade Blazor apps with .NET 6. Blazor is a web UI framework for building client-side web applications using .NET and C#. With Blazor, you can build rich, interactive web UI components using just open web standards, HTML, CSS, and then .NET and C# instead of JavaScript. With Blazor, you can take your Blazor components, and due to its flexible hosting model, you can host those components on a server, in the cloud. You can host them on WebAssembly, in a browser. You can even host them in native client mobile and desktop apps using a modern approach. With Blazor, you can take the same web UI components and reuse them across mobile, desktop, and web. Blazor is part of ASP.NET Core, your modern web framework for .NET. ASP.NET Core has everything that you need to build rich, modern web UI and powerful back-end services. The addition of Blazor to ASP.NET Core extends the reach of your web applications to the client. There's no need to rewrite your ASP.NET Core apps to use Blazor. Blazor components can be added directly to your existing MVC views and Razor pages. Who's using Blazor today? Well, in the keynote, we saw that GE Digital is using Blazor. They wrote their Flight Pulse app to put data and analytics in the hands of more than 3,000 pilots to help them improve safety and efficiency on every flight. The back-end configuration for what data those pilots actually see, that was built using Blazor. Spot by Explore is a leading provider of solutions for the dry cleaning industry, and they wrote a beautiful new modern web UI for their existing point of sales application. You know, the original UI, as you saw, beauty, of course, is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe people think that was also beautiful. Nothing wrong with a little battleship gray, but I think their new UI looks pretty sweet. They built the new UI using Blazor Server. They were able to reuse their existing .NET investments to provide a modern web experience for their users. What about Microsoft? Does Microsoft use Blazor? Yes, we use Blazor for both internal projects and also for external product development. Microsoft Interact is our insider trading compliance platform. It's used to identify and notify insiders at Microsoft of their responsibilities when trading Microsoft securities. This app was built using Blazor as well as ASP.NET Core and a bunch of other .NET technologies. And then Dynamics 365 Connected Store. This is a new offering for optimizing in-store operations with real-time observational data. They built their in-store configuration app and setup app as a Blazor application. Now, Blazor in .NET 6 is loaded with lots of great new features, way more than we have time to cover in just this session, but we'll cover as many as we can. For the rest, there's lots of Blazor talks at .NET Conf this week, so be sure to check them all out. I'll point out a few at the end. But some stuff that I want to highlight here. .NET Hot Reload is supported for Blazor applications in .NET 6. You can quickly make changes to your app and apply them to the running application. You can now persist any state that you use when pre-rendering your components from the server, from your ASP.NET Core app, so that it can be reused when the app loads on the client. You have a much better story for error handling with error boundaries in Blazor in .NET 6. We have a whole new tool chain for dealing with WebAssembly in Blazor WebAssembly apps. You can do ahead-of-time compilation for much better runtime perf. You can link in native dependencies into your Blazor WebAssembly application. You can also relink the runtime to remove unused features. We'll be talking a lot about these new WebAssembly features in Steve Sanderson's talk tomorrow. The download size of Blazor WebAssembly apps is much smaller in .NET 6. You can dynamically render components. You can render components from your existing JavaScript apps, like your Angular app or your React application in .NET 6. We added support for custom event args. You can write JavaScript initializers to initialize logic before and after your Blazor application runs. You can define JavaScript modules for each of your components that sit alongside your component code. We did a bunch of work on the component model as well. Child components can now infer their generic type parameters from ancestor components when you have a more elaborate hierarchy of components. You can put your generic type constraints in Razor now. You can handle large binary data when you're doing JavaScript interop. For Blazor server app developers, we removed the SignalR message size limitations. We added support for required component parameters, handling query string parameters, influencing the HTML head, and we have much better SVG support now. Whew, I mean, that is a lot. And I'm really excited to show you a bunch of these new features. All right, getting started with Blazor, super easy. All you got to do is go to blazor.net and download and install the .NET SDK. Once you've got that, you can then get going and start developing with your Visual Studio of choice. And let's go take a look at Blazor in .NET 6. All right, so let's go ahead and pop open Visual Studio 2022. I've got it installed here, and let's create a new project. I would like to create a Blazor application. I'm going to create a Blazor server app for this app, and I actually recommend that's a good place to start. If you're building your first Blazor app, Blazor server is really, really nice. That's a fine name for our Blazor app. Oh yeah, .NET 6, LTS, long-term support, love that. Blazor is in the box with .NET 6. So let's create this. Okay, so here is our first Blazor application. And the first thing we want to note is that this app, the project files, is looking pretty simple here. We're using the new ASP.NET Core minimal hosting model, so we don't have a startup class. Instead, we have this simple program CS file that has all of our startup-related code, configuring services, setting up the middleware pipeline, and so forth. This is also using the latest C# features, so we've got top-level statements here. We're using implicit usings. We've got namespace, file-scoped namespaces, and we've also turned on null state checking in all of the ASP.NET Core templates. Looks great. OK, let's go ahead and run it and see what it looks like. All right. So when we run this app, that looks like a standard Blazor app with the classic purple gradient on the left. But one thing that is different about this is if we go look at the sources for this application, let's go digging into the CSS, Bootstrap. And here, notice right there, this is Bootstrap 5.1. We've updated all of the ASP.NET Core templates, including the Blazor templates, to use the latest version of Bootstrap. OK. Let's write some code. So I'm going to snap this over to the side, and I'm going to bring Visual Studio over to the left. Let's give myself a little bit more room. And where do we want to go? Let's go to index.razor. That's the Razor component for the home page. And let's give myself, again, I think, a little bit more room. And let's change some stuff. So instead of hello world, how about hello.NET conf 2021? And then we're going to hit the magic hot reload button. And boom, it shows up right there so fast. We're updating the app as it's running. No need to restart it. No need to rebuild it. We can patch it live while it's executing. Again, as we saw in the keynote, I've added that setting so I can hot reload on file save. So you'll see me saving instead of hitting that button, and that's why that's working. All right, what else can we do? Let's change this component parameter. Let's change this. I don't know. Isn't this so cool? And then we will save that. Ready? Save. And almost immediately, it shows up in our little component right here. We can add components to the home page. Let's add a counter. And we'll save that. We've got a counter. We can click the counter. The count goes up. While we're at it, let's add all the components that's in the template. Let's add a fetch data component right here. This fetch data component will render a weather forecast table. So we'll go ahead and save that. And there, it just hot reloads right onto the page. Great. Now, notice we didn't lose the count. The count is still there. The app state was preserved. This is one of the great things about hot reload. If you're like deep in a form or a nested tree view and you just want to tweak the UI, no need to recreate that app state in order to make those changes. You can just change the UI while you're right there. All right, let's go to our counter component and let's make some changes to it. So instead of, in our C# code, instead of increasing by 1, let's increase by 2. We'll save that. And now if I click on the counter, yep, it's incrementing by 2s. Let's even add a component parameter. Let's do a parameter attribute right here. And let me go add a little white space. And then let's add a property. And we'll do increment amount. And then let's go to the end. We'll initialize this to 1. OK, and then instead of incrementing by 2 now, let's increment by that increment amount parameter that we defined before. We can go ahead and save that. That'll hot reload. Nothing really new yet that's showing up in the UI. But if we go to our counter component now, we should be able to set the increment amount to something else. Let's set it to not int 16, about to 10. That looks good. And we'll go ahead and hot reload that. And now when I click the count, yep, we're incrementing by tens. So we can hot reload markup, like HTML markup. We can hot reload components. We can hot reload the .NET C# code. That's .NET hot reload. We can also hot reload changes to our CSS styles. So let's go play around with the styling of this app. I'm going to go into the www root folder and pull out the root CSS file for this application. There it is. And I want to change the color of this button. That would be this class right here, button primary. So instead of this bluish color, let's type red. And as soon as I hit the D in red, it's already updated. We've hot reloaded those CSS style changes into the live DOM. Like notice, the app is still not even saved. Like this is happening as we type. This is the power of Visual Studio 2022. We can change this to whatever we want. We can say green or purple. Gotta love purple when you're a .NET dev. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna go back to the blue because I like that. So that's CSS hot reload for your top level CSS styles. We can also do the same thing with our component-specific styles. So let's go to I think we have some component-specific styles for the layout. So main layout.razor has a main layout.razor.css. These are CSS styles that will only apply to the layout. Let me give myself a little bit more width here so we can see more of the layout. You notice there's this top row that's sort of this grayish color. That's set by this style right here, this class. The background color is sort of this grayish color look. Now when we type red, it doesn't immediately update. That's because component-specific styles, they actually have to be built as part of the app. So they get scoped to just that one component. But if we save it, ready, here we go, we'll save the file, then it updates. So you can still get that rapid development experience. You just got to save the file when you're doing component-specific styles. But still really, really cool. We'll save that again, switch it back, and there we go. Okay, so that's hot reload for .NET and CSS. It'll make your life, hopefully, so much more productive. All right, cool. So what do we want to do next? So I think what we want to do next, let me go back to giving myself more coding space. Let's talk about error boundaries and error handling in particularly Blazor rendering code. In .NET 6, we have a much better way of handling errors when something happens as part of the component rendering. So let's say this weather forecast component has a bug. Let's go find it. Fetch data.razor. Down here and on initialize, it's got this service that it calls to get some random weather forecast data. And we're going to introduce a bug here. I'm going to say we're going to throw a new invalid operation exception. Boom. That's bad. Oh, man. OK, now I'm going to save that. All right, now nothing happened yet. And this is important for if you're using hot reload for the first time. We did update the logic of the weather forecast component so that when it's initialized, that it should try to fetch the data. And there should be an exception that got thrown. But the component has already been initialized. We didn't do anything to cause that code to re-execute. So we need to do something. So we're going to just refresh the page. That'll cause it to re-execute. So that's something you got to keep in mind when you're using hot reload. Like, what state is my app in? What code has been executed? If you're wondering why I'm not seeing the result of my changes. And there, yeah. So even in pre-rendering of this app, we had the exception thrown when it tried to pre-render that weather forecast data. OK, can we do better for handling this error? So we can using the new error boundaries component. So if we go back to the home page where we're rendering that fetch data component, let's add an error boundary. This is a component. And what this thing does is you put child content inside of it. And it will, if everything's good, if there's no exception, it will render its child content. If there's an exception, then it will render some error content in place of that child content. OK? So we can go ahead and hot reload this. Let's save that. And yeah, so now instead of my fetch data component, I'm getting this sort of red box with a little icon. Like, what is that? Well, that's the default error content for the error boundary. We can look in the browser to see what exactly is that thing. And it turns out, yeah, it's just a div. It's just a div with this Blazor error boundary class. So where's all that like fancy background coloring and icon coming from? Well, in the default CSS styles that we provide in the Blazor templates, we add some styling for that particular class that sets the background color, adds the icon using some SVG and so forth. But of course, you can change this content to be whatever you want. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me go back to index.razor. And for this, I've got a little got my snippets. I'm just going to copy this one in so I don't have to type all of this stuff out. We'll save a little bit of time here. So I'm going to write over this. Okay, and let's go back to the app so we can see it. Now what's happening here is we still have our child content. It's explicitly specified now because we also want to explicitly specify what the error content should be when there's an exception. Okay, so if we go ahead and save that, yeah, now we're getting our custom error content. We're getting a div with a class of an alert, like a Bootstrap alert. We've got our own text in there and a really sad kitten. Yeah, so that's an error boundary. It's a much better way to handle exceptions in your Blazor rendering code. Okay, let's go ahead and clean this back up so that we get rid of all the errors. We don't need those anymore. Let's go back to our weather forecast service and remove the exception and hot reload that all back in. Now, one thing I want you to make sure you're noticing up at the top in the browser tab, watch it as I tab around in the application. You know, we're on the counter page and it updates to counter. We're on the fetch data page and it updates to weather forecast. This Blazor app is influencing the HTML head to set the title for each page. That's now supported and in the box in .NET 6. Let me show you how that's done. So if we go back to index.razor, there's this page title component that you can add to your pages, and that will set the page title. It actually signals that it wants to set the page title, and then there's another component that actually handles doing that, which we'll see in a second. You don't just have to only set the page title. You can actually set anything you want in the head. In fact, there's a head content component, and in here you can put meta tags or whatever you want to do. So it's not just limited to the title, but that's pretty common, so we provided a specific component for that. All right, so these components, they signal they want to render to the head, and then there's a head outlet component that actually deals with that. Where is the head outlet component? Well, it's over here in this is layout.cshtml. Like, wait, hold on. We've jumped out of Razor here, right? This isn't a Razor file. This is a Razor page or an MVC view potentially. Dan, I thought this was a Blazor talk. Well, remember, Blazor's part of ASP.NET Core. They're meant to be used together. Blazor server projects out of the box are set up to do pre-rendering. We're pre-rendering the components from your pages and views, and that's what's happening here. When we render from the server the head, we want to make sure that the title gets set as part of that pre-rendering. So we add the head outlet component right there using the built-in component tag helper. We also are careful about how that component is ordered relative to the rest of the app being rendered. You may have noticed that instead of just a host.cshtml file, which you may have seen in the past in earlier versions, we have both that host.cshtml file and the layout. That's because we actually want to render the app first, let all those page title components run, let the head content components run, so that the head outlet component can then do the right thing when it renders the head. This is sort of that inside-out rendering that's done in MVC applications. But this is a good example of using Blazor and MVC and Razor pages all together. So that's influencing the HTML head. Next, I want to actually do something with query string parameters. So imagine with this weather forecast table, I want to have some buttons where I can like change the start date. Like I don't want to just look for this week. I want to see next week, or maybe I want to go backwards in time, or 10 weeks from now. Wouldn't it be nice if we could know the weather 10 weeks from now? So we're going to dream big here, and we're going to add some buttons to this thing so we can do that. Now let me go find the fetch data component. Now, when we do this, let me give myself a little bit more room. We're going to leverage the query string, so that we can keep track of what the current start date is. And I'm just going to actually grab a snippet here again from my notes. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit bigger one, but we'll walk through it. Don't worry. Okay, so we're going to just replace this code and put this in instead. All right, so now we've got a couple of buttons at the bottom of our table that are going to call previous week and next week whenever we click those buttons, okay? And then let's go look at the implementation of those guys. Those are just calling this update start date method, and that is taking in the number of days that you want to shift. And we have this start date datetime field that's keeping track of that state. It's part of the component state, and we're updating it to be the new value. Now, what we want to do then is we actually want to save the start date on the URI. That way we can bookmark that particular start date for the weather forecast. We can send that link to someone and they can see the same data. In Blazor and .NET 6, we have new helper methods that help you manipulate the URI and the query string in particular. So on Navigation Manager, which I think we have a red squiggle because we don't actually have a Navigation Manager yet. Let's go ahead and inject that. So inject a Navigation Manager, and we'll call it an aptly named navigation manager. This is basically using dependency injection to add a property onto the page. All right, great. So now we should have no red squiggles, and we don't. This get URI with query string parameter helper method, it will generate a URI based on the current browser address and add any query string parameters that you specify. So here we're saying we want a parameter named whatever the name of the start date property is, which we'll look at in a second, and then put the value right in there. And then what we do is we use the navigation manager to navigate to that URI. So we're going to update the browser address. That will cause the Blazor router to kick in and things to re-render. Now, when we render that page, we want to now capture that start date so that we can use it in our component. And that's what's happening up here above. So instead of onInitialize, we're now calling onParameter setAsync. And the reason we're doing that is because we have this new start date parameter that we want to supply from the query string. So that's what this new attribute does. This means please bind this parameter from the query string for me. All right, and then once we've got that, if we got one, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll just use datetime.now, and then we'll go and fetch the weather forecast data for that start date, okay? So let's go, and I think I have to restart this app. Yep, let's go ahead and rebuild. We've made too many code changes to hot reload in that one, which is fine. Okay, yeah, we got our previous week, next week. Let's see, do they work? Yeah, so I go forwards, I go backwards. Let's make this a little bigger so we can see the address bar. And there's our query string parameter being added. And so if I like duplicate this tab, so now we can see that we've got the same same week of data that we're viewing in our weather forecast data. So that's the ability to manipulate the query string in .NET 6 with Blazor. All right, cool. What do we want to do next? Let's look, I think we definitely want to look at rendering Blazor components from JavaScript. One thing we hear a lot about from customers is, they love the idea of Blazor, but man, I've got a whole bunch of JavaScript code already. Maybe I'm using Angular, maybe I'm using React. How can I use these two things together? Well, with Blazor and .NET 6, we now have a way for you to render Blazor components directly from JavaScript. And this enables you to reuse Blazor components in existing JavaScript-based applications. It's a fairly low-level feature, but it enables so much cool stuff. Let me pop over here to a different project. This is a sample that's in the ASP.NET.org in the samples repo that you can definitely go and take a look at. And let's pop this open. So in this sample application, what we're doing is we've actually got some custom MS Build logic for generating Angular and React JavaScript components around a Blazor component. Okay? It's pretty cool. Now this is just a sample. This is not something that's like shipped and supported as part of the framework, but it shows you what is now possible. So we've got this counter component here. It's a little bit more elaborate than the default Blazor counter because it's showing a few more things. But you'll notice it's got these attributes at the top to say, please generate me an Angular component for this thing, or please generate me a React component. And then in our Blazor app, we register the counter as both an Angular and React component because we might want to use it in either, and then we're good to go. So I'm going to, these other two libraries, that's just the sample code for doing the code generation. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Let's get that started. Now, that app's not going to do anything because what we want to use is an Angular app that makes use of those files. And we're just spinning up the Blazor server to make those files available to our Angular application. When we publish, we would put those things all together. All right, so let's now go to an Angular app. I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. There it is. OK, so this is an Angular app. And when I built that previous application, it generated some code for me, which is in this app folder. We have this counter component, a TypeScript file that was generated for our Blazor counter. And we also have this Blazor adapter, which has all this infrastructure code that's used by that counter. And the key piece is this Blazor root components add. That's the new hook that we have in Blazor for rendering Blazor components from JavaScript. OK, so let's start this Angular app now. So we're going to do npm start. And this will do an Angular thing to get it up and running. And what should happen here, if everything is working, is we should have an Angular app with Angular UI that then has Blazor components inside of it. All right, so we're generating browser application bundles. This is the whole JavaScript toolchain. OK, there's the Angular app. So this is an Angular app now. But if I click this button, it adds our Blazor counter onto the page. So when I'm clicking click me here, we're actually executing, this is a Blazor WebAssembly-based component. We're executing that as part of our Angular application. To show you that's really happening, we can go into the network and let's just refresh. And oh, we got to clear our filters here. And you can see there's like, Blazor, that WebAssembly JS that's getting loaded. Down here at the bottom, there's like .NET .js as well. So we're able to render our Blazor components from JavaScript. Super cool. I think this is going to enable a lot of users to be able to take advantage of Blazor in a lot more situations. All right. Oh, I think we're getting close to time. So let me hop back here to slides for just a few more. I got to give a shout out to the new .NET WebAssembly build tools. These are really useful for Blazor WebAssembly apps to enable ahead-of-time compilation, runtime relinking, support for native dependencies. Definitely check out Steve Sanderson's talk tomorrow to learn all about these. And then Blazor WebAssembly apps in .NET 6 have gotten way, way smaller. I think in .NET 5, if you built like the smallest Blazor WebAssembly app you could, it was about 1.7 megabytes. That's about as small as you could get it if you removed all the extra stuff. In .NET 6, thanks to a whole bunch of work on the .NET IL linker and on that .NET WebAssembly build tools, we can actually get a Blazor WebAssembly app in just about a meg. It's about a 40% reduction. We have one of these published, actually, that you can take a look at. This is at minblazor.anthonychu.com. Anthony, thank you for helping me set this up on Azure Static Web Apps, a great host for Blazor applications. This is a Blazor app. If we F12 and look at what this is downloading, let's clear the site data, network. We'll refresh this, and look at that down here at the bottom. This whole app is just slightly over a meg, so much, much smaller, so your app loads faster and your users get a better experience. So much more in .NET 6 for Blazor that we won't have time to cover today, but please make sure that you go and check out the other Blazor talks. Later today, Javier and I will be talking about next generation Blazor components with .NET 6. Later after that, Ilan Lipton is going to show us using Blazor with .NET MAUI in a whole session. And then, of course, there's a code party, so hang out for the code party. On day 2, there will be talk by Steve Sanderson on the new WebAssembly capabilities for .NET for Blazor WebAssembly apps. Definitely don't want to miss that. Anthony will be there with Simona talking about using Azure Static Web Apps to host your Blazor applications. And then a whole bunch of other great stuff. Definitely go and listen. Thank you for paying attention. And with that, I think we will take a few questions if there's some time.
All right, let's take a look at the big board here. We've got questions coming in. Make sure that you put your questions up at #.NETConf, and we'll pop them into the board here. What do you see, Jamie?
Yeah, let's go with will the static web app pipeline for GitHub and or Azure DevOps also optimize Blazor WebAssembly for .NET 6 applications?
Yeah, so I know for a fact that Azure Static Web Apps has deployed the .NET Blazor, the .NET WebAssembly build tools, and that will then do runtime relinking for you, and it enables, if you turn it on, ahead of time compilation is an opt-in feature, but if you turn that on in your project, it will then just kick in. So the tools are there in Azure Static Web Apps. I'm less sure about Azure DevOps, but we can check up on that.
Does that mean that I can set these things up in like if I build it correctly, it doesn't matter what pipeline I use to be optimized, or do I need some pipeline support, as Stacy asks?
You'll need the SDK to actually do the publish, and if the .NET WebAssembly build tools are present, they will then kick in. So if you have both installed, you'll get the benefits of both. If you're in an environment that only has the SDK and not the .NET WebAssembly build tools, they're called an optional workload in the SDK in .NET 6. We have these sort of bolt-on pieces now to the SDK, like MAUI is also an optional workload. You need to install that optional workload into your build environment for it to kick in.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So as long as my pre-setup step, whether it be a shell script or a batch file or a PowerShell, installs that workload, it's theoretically possible that any of those pipelines or third-party pipelines will be able to do that.
You can definitely do it yourself. You can set up your own Docker container that has that set up. Whether it has it built in, I know Azure Static Websites does.
Cool.
I'm not sure if they've got it lit up yet, but hopefully soon.
All right. Got time for another one?
Yeah, we have time for another one. This is a long one. This one.
So let's do the Evan one. That's what Evan got to say. Okay. Evan wants to know, what about pre-rendering for SEO, for search engine optimization? That's the big question when it comes to these kind of applications.
Absolutely. You can pre-render Blazor WebAssembly apps too. We don't typically do that for you by default, and the reason is it takes a little bit more thought to realize, well, my component might be on the server, or it might be on the browser, and I need to make sure that I write my code appropriately, that I don't take a dependency in one environment versus the other. But you can turn it on yourself. Like there's a pre-rendering mode on the component tag helper where you say, I would like to pre-render a Blazor WebAssembly component right here, and then it will just work.
Very cool.
I actually have a sample project on my GitHub account that shows Blazor WebAssembly pre-rendering. You can take a look at that. And you can use the new state persistence feature that we have in .NET 6, where any state you used in pre-rendering, you can persist it into the page. And then the Blazor WebAssembly app can pick that up. Like your podcast list can get just put into the page, and then you don't even need to request it again once you're on the client because you already got it on the server once. Why do it twice?
Amazing.
All right, very
For
cool.
those of us who don't know, what's your GitHub handle so they can find you?
Dan Roth 27.
DanRoth27.
All right, Dan Roth 27. And as we head out, I just want to make another reminder that the way that you win these great prizes, the Xbox One, the drone, is you do the challenges, right? So .netconf.net/challenges.
Yes. Yes, we have tons of challenges. You could win $500, a mini drone, an Xbox, and more.